in that too.
Mark will be.
Decided
Yeah.
I wanted to get
I
one.
don't know where the heck
He might be.
right now. He's not
All
that-
right, we ready?
None, I can't get it.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our York County Economic Development Committee meeting. Today is obviously Thursday, March 6th, and we're going to start with a quick prayer, and I'll give the prayer today. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this day. We thank you for the beautiful weather. We just thank you for everything you grace us with. We thank you for the leadership here in York County and all the people in the room today that are interested in economic development here. So just look over us, help us be the best public servants we can be, and help us make the decisions in the best interest of York County. In your name we pray this prayer. Amen. Good, man. See you too. All right, so let's guess. I think you know everybody's in the room. I don't feel like introducing yourselves to you. Okay. We'll just move it on because everybody here is known. Dean, appreciate you coming back, and I just got your text of the toolkit app.
Sure,
So thank you for sending that over.
absolutely.
Give us an update on the toolkit, please. Sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a reminder for everybody, this started kind of a labor of how can we help small business over coffee conversation with Councilman Audette and his passion, and and it's really been his passion since he got on council of what can we do to help small business. During that conversation, I knew that we were in the process of utilizing some of the economic development funds that you guys had provided. The chamber with putting together a more robust internship program for companies to kind of model after. And so, so this is something that, as you know from last month, we turned this over, gave some guidance to our two of our interns, and they did the research and legwork to put it together. They took your remarks, y'all's remarks from last month. They implemented those changes. After we made those changes, I went back and we sent that. I sent it to Mitch and Jason Floor over at RHEDC, since they're mentioned in here, John Bloomberg, Small Business Development Center, since those were kind of two of the ones. And we've got it up here on the screen. I'll just kind of flip through. Molly on our team, she's our marketing and brand strategist. She kind of went through, just kind of made sure that from a marketing and brand standpoint, there wasn't anything in here that she felt like would misrepresent us or the county. But I think, if we choose to kind of go forward on from here, my recommendation, since this has been a collaboration of our two organizations with economic development and the chamber, would be to have Molly and Caroline kind of go through it and make sure it's kind of representing each brand. And then I think you guys mentioned maybe jumping in and getting Greg Suskin involved from the county for and maybe the three of them, all being the marketing and communication side of the equation, could put together a launch plan. I don't feel like I'm qualified and experienced to put together what would be a great PR plan. I've seen Caroline and Molly work. They do outstanding work. They work well together, and I've had great confidence that they put together a great plan. And I know Molly worked closely with Greg during when we were trying to promote Pennies for Progress, and he was helpful in getting her information. So this was all stuff that y'all saw before. Like I said, there was some additions made in there. Here's one page. Y'all asked, well, where are the colleges? So we listed the 3 public colleges. We didn't go in and list the private entity groups like ARC Labs or Laurel Institute that are private, because you start listing those, there's other private entities that are in the area that offer some sort of online service. And we kind of felt like, for the most part, this is very much a public service. All the entities involved and even listed provide some level of free access. I mean, even us at the chamber, there are certain things that we offer anybody that calls us, anybody that walks in the door. Now, we do have investors, and they get different level services. I've compared it before, kind of like the free app versus the premium app. And I would say that you go to the next page, you see the departments here, but then you have BEL, which is the Black Economic Leadership League, and York County Gravity Center. Both of them are kind of a fee-based service, but they also, when somebody first walks through the door, they'll certainly provide some guidance just out of the gate. But then, frequently asked questions was there before. We've got the back page. We utilized the brand that we've kicked off at the annual awards, Make It York County. We've got the two organizations listed. So I think we've captured everything that we had talked about. We feel good about it. We feel like it's public consumption ready.
Excellent, excellent. So I just got a couple questions.
Yeah.
First of all, Dean, you and your team have done a fantastic job. Nice work, very nice work.
Thank you.
I think at this point right now, I think that we can again have Greg get involved and we can talk about, how we want to go ahead and roll it out. Let's get some media on this thing. Yeah, when we were at the over at York Tech, I talked to Stacy about this. She's very excited that she's going to be in this. And again, I think it's not just like all of us kind of marketing it, but Stacy's going to market it, and these other education, the ones you have listed will market it. I think that once people see it and we get it out in different areas, I think it's going to be very exponential, I guess maybe be a better word for it.
I agree, Tom, and I think, like I mentioned before, I think it's important that these guys that kind of represent making sure that we get ourselves put out there in the public eye is how do they brand this in a way that people know that this is really, I hate to use the word property, but kind of the intellectual property of York County Economic Development and the Chamber, so not to be reproduced just as their own, but
Absolutely.
We're glad to let them use ours.
Well, and I think that it's important that, I think when we do the media blitz with Greg, that you would be involved in that to talk about it.
Sure.
In the advertisement of it.
But I'm like you, I would like to see, York Tech, Winthrop, Clinton,
Yeah.
SVDC, Rock Hill EDC, all of them,
Right.
hopefully will want to use it and post it and put it on there.
Well,
and then with that, Make It York County and our brands on there, I think it shows some of the desires of the county's strategic plan to show partnerships and collaboration. So I think there's this is kind of one of those low-hanging fruits that's not hard for, it's kind of hard for people to poke at, and so I think it does position us well to make some good steps toward working together.
Yeah, two quick comments, Dean. I think I mentioned it to you, but I think it was not our last council meeting before, Watts had brought a copy of this in, and somebody from the crowd came up afterwards and said, I've been looking for something like this. I said, I've looked everywhere for all these kind of things, and the fact that it's all in one place like this, I said, this makes my day. They're like, when this thing launches, let me know because I'll be the first one on it. Which was testimony right there, right?
Now, that's a great point. I know I'm talking too much at y'all's meeting, but I was surprised when I handed it off to the interns to start working. Within a couple of weeks, they came back to me and they said, there's nothing like this that exists. We can't just go find one of these to copy and paste. We're pulling information from 12 different locations. And so it was a bit of a surprise to us how hard it was to kind of grab it and try to capture it in one spot.
It's beautiful.
And I'm sure we've probably missed some stuff. Once we get it out there, somebody will probably call and say, hey, why didn't you put such and such in there? And we'll say, man, didn't even know that was out there, but a great resource. And so we can certainly always add to it.
It'll be an evolving document for sure.
Yeah,
It will be.
absolutely.
One last thing. Can we get, I guess, Mitch and, at this point, can we start getting Greg involved and we can kind of talk about the whole process of getting it marketed?
Totally, that's part of the reason I wanted Caroline here today out of our
Okay.
office. I think it's important, and Dean's right, her and Molly work really well together.
Okay.
So I think as we talk about, like at the chamber dinner, the rollout of the brand, this is a great segue to talk about some of those collaborative projects and business out there.
Yeah,
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
and we're happy to have Greg do it, but we are in the process of hiring our communications and engagement director that y'all approved this year. So we're excited about that. We had to repost it a second time, but we're in the midst of a hiring process. And I think that person is going to be in a position to better coordinate and work on this with all of our partners outside stakeholders too. So excited about that position and thankful for y'all putting that in.
Let's get it going. Let's get it going. Dean, thank you.
What I noticed about it, especially using the online, there's a bunch of hyperlinks that take you straight to departments. It's probably, we need to just make sure that the departments are aware that they may be starting to get emails or requests from that, of those hyperlinks, making sure they're aware and, before it all rolls out. And the staff, especially in the planning and services, it looks like there's several links to that, and as well as economic development.
One thing we'll do is we'll ask Mitch to share this with his peers that are going to receive information.
Very good. Mitch, your staff, y'all have anything y'all want to add?
No,
Toolkit?
I just applaud Dean and then the chamber did a great job with this. Really appreciate you doing the internship.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anybody else in the room have anything they want to share about the toolkit? All right, Dean, thank you so much for taking time to come in today and completing this document. We look forward to involving you into giving something a little bit that is now. Meets your needs. Thank you. All right, next up is Mark Ferris. Mark's going to talk to us about incentives, the different types of incentives, and why we would consider one incentive over another. Mark, how much time do you need?
Lots questions, maybe 25 minutes, maybe?
25?
Maybe not. I'll try to go through it quickly.
All right. Karen's son has a baseball game.
Sorry,
and
okay.
Shawwal time.
Okay,
we
we're
don't.
gonna get you out of here then. We're gonna get you out of here.
She's got an hour and 15-minute drive, so we're going to hurry to breeze here. Okay.
She told me to hurry up.
That's
I was
right.
like, that's
It's a long ways
impossible.
from here. Well, I'll be glad to individually talk with any of you if you have any questions about any of this. I just, in this process, a lot of times, if you don't deal with incentives on a daily basis,
Right.
it's both convoluted and confusing, and you get sometimes misunderstandings about some of the programs. So I wanted to just, as we begin the process of looking at the program and looking at maybe some additions to policies or guidelines, that we go through this, give you a chance to ask questions, and of course it doesn't necessarily mean we have to exhaust the topic today. But what I put is, I think there are about 12 slides here, just going through the state versus a local. I think that's an important distinction because when a project comes to Mitch, we double team it with the state in terms of putting a presentation together. They have a slate of incentives and we have ours. Obviously there are other partners involved in winning a project. It truly takes a village to do that, but state and local are the ones I was going to focus on. Origination of the fee, that's something that a lot of people don't even think about when it came in and how it came in and why it came in. Multi-county industrial park district, special source revenue credits, and then aligning our strategies with the tactics involved in incentives. And I think you remember last time I talked about it, one of my famous quotes I had a good chance to meet him before he left and went to work for Toyota, but Carlos Gunn said, and you can't see it here, said that incentives are not strategy, they are tactics, which means that a lot of communities in South Carolina depend on incentives to win projects. That's not a smart thing to do. And as I said last time, as we talked about it, they can be very helpful in looking at, especially in a competitive process, where we can be most aggressive with a company that's looking in York County. Mm-hmm. So residential versus industrial, this stretches back to a study that we did, a cost of community services study. These are dated numbers. But after Act 388 came out, we began to look at how that might impact community services to be provided by the county on the community, and then the differentiation between the uses, industrial, open space, residential, and so we went and did there were 3 or 4 people involved in this: finance director, planning director, myself, and a few others. And we used a template that was done by the Urban Land Institute and applied numbers based on original information that we got from the different departments. The long story short is we found that for every dollar of property tax that the county, now this doesn't include the municipalities, but every dollar property tax that the county receives, we only spend 31 cents in services to an industry or business. Conversely, for every dollar of property tax we receive from a residential use, we spend $1.45 in services. That's just a fact in the way that the system in South Carolina is set up, okay? So we have different use assessments, unlike North Carolina. There's a per $100 valuation. It doesn't matter if it's a boat or a plane or a house that you own or rent. And in South Carolina, we choose to use use assessments to differentiate and then place burdens differently on those uses. So I read recently that in an article about Good Jobs First that was printed, I think, last week, I saw in the Herald, and of course they did this nationwide, but it said that the Governmental Accounting and Standards Boards about 5 years ago required that the counties look at incentives and talk about what, especially in the situation where we provide incentive, what those opportunity dollars mean. So and that's not a bad thing to do. I think that in terms of accounting practices, you know, assets, liabilities, that all needs to be looked at. But the study assumes that these jobs would have come to South Carolina or York County particularly without fee in lieu of tax. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, about how different it is between us and some of our neighboring states. But owner-occupied residential taxes, and I use the average value of a home, I use the millage rate that would be applied to that average home after Act 388, the operating school operations portions, I use Rock Hill School District, and a 4% assessment, which is what it is for owner-occupied residential versus commercial business or even rental property.
Yeah.
So that generates $2,000, a little bit over $2,000 in property taxes. And if you look at that same amount of industrial investment, not including, of course, the school operations reductions and property taxes at a 6% assessment. Remember, industrial used to be, especially manufacturing, used to be at 10.5%. I'm using 6% and saying that we've done a fee in lieu of tax already on it. But if you look at the differential between what generates in terms of the millage at that level, it's almost 4 times that amount. So the reality is, the average pupil expenditure in Rock Hill, according to their website, is $11,000, almost $12,000. Assuming, let's say, that half of that is paid for either by the soon-to-be-gone Department of Education in the U.S. or state funds. Of course, the state, and when we passed the 1-cent sales tax, additional penny sales tax in South Carolina on goods and services, that was pledged towards school districts. But even if you account for half of that being funded by the federal and the state, we're spending almost $6,000 per student. So where does that differential come from? You know, how many students we have per home is something that we need to look in, especially per district. But the reality is in South Carolina, guys, that without business and industry, a school district cannot operate.
Right.
There's a Quarter of Shame article or series of articles that appeared in the state newspaper, and it's been decades ago. But it looked at those communities, and I won't name any, but they're below the fall line in Columbia, who do not have an industrial base investment, and they cannot therefore generate the funding from the residential, even when our car taxes are extraordinarily high. You know, there's just not enough money, even at a 10.5% on cars, to generate adequate expenditures per pupil in their school systems. As a result, the state had to take over a couple of them. I think they still actually do.
Well, the 8%, the 8 millage points that they can levy, though, on top of businesses to offset the difference in the operating cost, it really is doubled down on businesses with that.
Yes.
Doubled down, because they're underfunding because of the 1 cent per dollar as opposed to 2 cents, which they originally proposed it at.
Yeah, my last GADC board, I had a representative of the Home Builders Association.
Yeah.
They made sure he was on there
Uh-huh.
because they heard me talk about this.
Uh-huh.
And in Greenville, it's another situation where, you know, there's some mixed opinions about growth. but he took exception to my characterization of subsidy. You know, we're subsidizing owner-occupied residential. Now, apartments, you know, they tend to pay more of their fair share, not enough to generate adequate school money, but just because of Act 388 and how we sit in South Carolina based on our use assessments. And this is an interesting, every year the Lincoln Institute does a study where it looks at effective tax rates. You know, everybody has in South Carolina, even we have all these different entities and different millages. And across the nation, Georgia does it differently than us and then differently from North Carolina. But they look at effective tax rates. On industrial property in South Carolina, we are the 5th highest in the nation. Okay? So if you just look at what $1 million worth of property valued is, the effective tax rate on that investment, and they use the largest city in South Carolina, which is Charleston, it's almost, and I'll be honest with you, years ago, they used to use Columbia. Columbia's millage rate's over 550 mills now, so it was the worst in the nation in terms of that liability for industrial property. Conversely, if you look at that same study on home owner-occupied homes, we're the 2nd lowest in the nation in terms of what that liability, property tax liability on owner-occupied homes. So that just reinforces my point that we're in a situation, a competitive environment, that we certainly want to welcome new people to the community, no doubt about it. We need additional housing, but we've got to have that balance. You know, we've got to maintain that aggressiveness for business and industry, or we will get underwater pretty quickly. So it just is a point that needs to be especially made in South Carolina, where that's an acute issue. So let's look at some of the incentives. Most commonly used incentives, people don't talk about it a lot, but the jobs training, the Ready SC is probably one of the more valuable ones. But let's just look at the traditional fiscal incentives. Jobs tax credits, that varies by county, and you probably already know that anytime a property is in a multi-county industrial park, there's an additional $1,000 per job jobs tax credit. Now, the jobs tax credits are applied towards liability for corporate income in South Carolina, okay? So a lot of companies in South Carolina do not claim income based on the fact that their products are sold elsewhere. So those credits can be millions of unused dollars. There's a 10-year carry forward for unused credits, but most manufacturers, they see a big number that actually the jobs tax credit cannot be applied in a lot of cases to their liability, especially if they just don't sell a lot in South Carolina. So jobs development credit, now that's differently. This was created, I think it was maybe 20 years ago, allows a company, after they negotiate with the state, to retain a portion of the individual income taxes. So, you know, when you get your paycheck, you see that 6% or 7%, whatever it is for your category, has been sent to Columbia. Okay, Columbia and the state government allows qualified companies to negotiate with that company to retain a portion of that. So those are new jobs that the company's bringing in. So the state says, since you're creating those jobs, we're going to allow you as a company to retain a portion of those credits and use it towards infrastructure on your site. Okay, so companies can use it to build buildings. Companies can use it to do a lot of things, but it has to be a fixed capital investment. They can't use it for machine equipment because that could be moved around. But any fixed capital investment almost qualifies for JDCs. These are a large number for companies who have high pay scales and high numbers of jobs, but both jobs tax credits, jobs development credits, and then the discretionary incentives, if you add all of those up, they pale in comparison to what a fee in lieu of tax might offer a company. So, in other words, if you look at the traditional kind of presentation made to a prospect, the fee in lieu of multi-county industrial park SSRC credits normally are much more than what the state offers. But the state has stepped up. The state will do pretty aggressive discretionary incentives sometimes. In fact, they will issue bonds to build a facility on occasion for particular projects like a BMW or a Boeing. So they can be pretty aggressive.
Is that exclusively through Commerce?
Well, it has to be legislative action.
Okay.
So they are, Commerce lobbies for the company to be included in the bond. The bonds are issued, and then those funds are paid to construct the facility. Now, the facility is obviously not owned by the company. After the bonds are retired, they have the ability to purchase it back. But, that's pretty aggressive. A lot of states will not do that. In South Carolina, on particular cases, not every one, I gotta say, I've only been involved in one in my career where that was done, but the state, on occasion, can really come to the table and give us some really big numbers for incentives. So,
Mark, can I ask you a quick
Yes.
question? What time, so when for the filing of requests of, whether it's the bonds or any incentive along there, what's normally the time frame it has to be submitted back to the state? Is it-
So it varies for the jobs development credits.
Yeah.
The coordinating council meets quarterly. They used to meet more often. I have to look at Mitch because they scaled back. They used to meet monthly, now they meet quarterly.
Mhm.
So Tom, when a company comes and the state says, yes, you can have JDCs,
Mhm.
it's contingent on the approval of a board that was created for that purpose.
Mhm.
And they meet quarterly, so it could take, 2 months, 3 months to get that approval.
Okay.
Now, I think they have a 99% approval rate, so it's almost a foregone conclusion that if the state, they don't always allow jobs development credits, but in the case they do,
Good.
it's almost assured that they're going to approve them and the company's going to be able to retain them.
There's also an application fee for that.
There is, it's 5,000?
Yeah, it's gotten up there.
Yeah, it used to be like 400, now it's like 5,000. But anyway,
And how long can you receive the JDC credits?
you can receive credits for 15 years.
15 years.
Wow. Okay.
That's good
Okay.
information, thank you.
So, and then our property taxes, okay? So the state, I think you heard me last time, the state,
One more quick question. On the jobs tax credits, the jobs development credits, if the state issues those, does it have anything to do with our taxes being abated for a period of time?
no.
That doesn't
No.
impact us?
The abatement, watch is written into the state legislation. I think it's in the Constitution, actually. So
Okay.
the abatement is not discretionary. Some of these incentives, like JDCs, are discretionary, and the state can choose to offer or not.
Okay.
Sometimes if it's a small company, the state won't go through the JDCs, as Teresa mentioned, because there's a pretty expensive filing fee. They'll just give them a grant, a couple of $100,000 in a grant, and that kind of is in lieu of a lot of times going through it. But the abatement is not discretionary. The abatement, if you qualify under the legislation, you get the abatement. All you have to do, I think it's called PT 330. You fill out a property tax form with the Department of Revenue and
Schedule A.
schedule it. Thank you. Getting jabbed here by the audience. But the property taxes, let's talk about property taxes. So what I did was just a property tax example of a $10 million manufacturing facility looking in York County with a negotiated fee. You can, at your discretion, this is the council's discretion, to provide a fee in lieu of tax to that company that would reduce their liability over a 30-year period most often. So if you look at 10 million times a 6% assessment, and I won't get into this, but manufacturing used to be assessed at 10.5% real and personal. The state passed legislation 2 years ago to provide a rebate program to the counties, but that's capped at $170 million. The last 2 years, the state reached the cap. So instead of being a 6% assessment, some companies were at 6.25 or 6.35. So they will make that money up once they reach the cap. But manufacturing was assessed at 10.5, so that's why fee in lieu of was so common. But now that, let's just say it's at 6, let's say in this case we offered a fee to this company at 368 millage, that's Rockville's millage rate again, unincorporated millage rate. It's $220,000, okay? So if you look at Charlotte, Gastonia, and Lincoln, these are the communities that at least I competed with. I think Mitch does as well pretty routinely.
If you look at that same $10 million, based on their uniform assessment, again, they don't assess based on use. It's a per $100 valuation, you see the calculation, times that assessment rate of 1.29 or 1.36. So instead of $220,000, it's 129 in Charlotte, 136 in Gastonia, 113 in Lincoln. This is before, okay, this is before they issue any other incentives. A lot of communities in North Carolina have a program where for the first year they will rebate 90% of your taxes. 80% second year, 70% third year, up to 5 years. I haven't seen it longer than 5 years.
When I was in Lincoln, depending on the investment, we would go anywhere between 5 to 10 years. In a certain case, we could consider 15.
Yeah. So in other words, if Lincoln County, if the company, after we do a fee for this company is looking at York, they get a tax bill of $220, they could have a tax bill of $11,000 year one versus $220,000 in York County.
What was the normal site, so what was the time frame in which they had to stay in that location though? Would you say you had to be there for 10 years and you would get a 5-year break or something? Is that-
They had to meet the guidelines that were laid out in terms of jobs and investment during the investment period.
Similar to our
If it's a 5-year incentive, they had to hit their investment goals and job goals.
Okay.
There was callbacks tied to it.
But these are performance-based, so if the company
Right.
closes, obviously, you know, they
Yeah.
don't get any incentive because they're not paying any taxes because they've gone.
Yeah.
But, so fee in lieu of tax, 1988, our first fee deal was Celanese. If you remember Herc Celanese, where the beautiful Riverwalk development is now. They used to require $150 million for that initial investment to get a 6% assessment. In 1993, they went from $150 million to $20 million and 600 jobs, $40 million and 400 jobs, $60 million and 200 jobs. 97, there was a big slate of legislation that changed all that. They created big fees, little fees, super fees, enhanced fees, and basically went to a minimum of $2.5 million. So as long as the company had $2.5 million, still at the discretion of the county could offer them a 6% fee. And undeveloped and under really poor counties, that drops to $1 million. So technically, not that some of these counties would, but technically they could offer a fee to a gas station, if they invested $1 million. But it has just been a change throughout the years in terms of how that has done. Multi-county industrial park legislation was actually introduced in '76, but it wasn't used until the 1980s. A smart attorney, actually his name is Wes Crum, started going to rural counties and saying, if my developed county agrees to give you 1% of their revenue in terms of this particular deal, will you enter into a multi-county industrial park agreement with them? It used to be multi-county industrial park, used to be truly 50-50. The counties would say, okay, well, it didn't have to be on the county line, it could be in either county, but they would say, let's team together, let's share costs, let's share expenses, and let's share revenues from every company that comes in there. The legislation kind of got bastardized a little bit, so that now, almost routinely, that's never done. What is done is you create a multi-county industrial park with a 1% split for your affiliate county, and you keep 99%. What that does is, that obviously gives them that additional $1,000 jobs tax credit that we talked about earlier, but inside a multi-county industrial park, companies do not pay taxes, they pay fees. That's an important distinction, because inside a multi-county industrial park, the council has the authority to redistribute funding or share that money however it chooses. It's completely up to the discretion of the county. So if you're going to provide infrastructure credits, then you're agreeing to do a multi-county
Yes.
industrial park.
Yes.
You're not doing a fee.
You cannot do infrastructure credits without it being in a multi-county industrial park. You cannot, you can have a fee outside a multi-county industrial park, and that drops the assessment, but the distribution of that revenue has to be proportionally the same to each taxing entity. to the schools, to the fire, to the whoever, you're just taking a 10.5 down to a 6, locking it in for 30 years,
Yeah.
and then providing on a pro-rata basis the same amount over those 30 years to those entities. Whereas in a multi-county industrial park, you have complete discretion about how to redistribute that revenue. So you don't necessarily have to give every taxing entity. That's where you issue special source revenue credits, because in that case, a lot of times you're taking that revenue proportionally again from each entity, but providing additional incentive to the company for infrastructure.
So, but if it's outside of an industrial park though, you say you would then have to have everybody in the, so what do you mean by everybody? Like, what is within that, like, what is your, like, how do I say it, zone, how do you mean by everybody?
So if you're, Tommy, if you're outside of multi-county industrial park,
Yeah.
and you issue a fee in lieu of tax agreement to a company,
Right,
it's just like normal taxes. That's
Right.
not true because it's considered fees,
right,
but you have to distribute that revenue based on, you go from a 10.5% to a 6% assessment, whatever that money is,
mhm.
the school district gets their millage.
Oh, okay. I get
The
it.
other taxing
Okay, never
entities,
mind. I was thinking
everybody,
of it.
yeah, everybody proportionally gets less.
Yep.
But you don't have the authority to issue infrastructure.
Understood.
Because you
Yeah.
can't redistribute revenue. It's just a fee agreement
Okay.
that is in place between the company and the county that reduces the assessment.
Yeah.
Proportionally, everybody gets less, but over the 30-year period,
Yeah,
everybody gets.
yeah, I was hearing
Yeah.
how you said it differently.
Yeah,
so.
I'm trying to speed up to get
Yeah,
Karen
you're
out
good.
here.
It's okay. Now do what you gotta do.
So this is my last slide. Cost versus benefits, local governments often fail to look at that. That's something that I think we need to do in every case, look at the costs and benefits. There are different programs you can use, but, and that should be done, in my opinion, on subdivisions. I'm working with a community now that's excited about annexing a parcel of property because there's going to be 220 houses on it. And I said, well, have you looked at the cost? Yeah, you're going to get additional revenue. You're going to be a bigger municipality. But if you look at what you're going to have to spend, police, fire, roads, whatever, to service this subdivision, because my slide earlier about the difference in property tax use assessment leads to us basically subsidizing that residential development. In my opinion, they would never generate enough revenue from owner-occupied homes. And that's what they want to build here, not rentals. To give the municipality enough money to cover the services they're going to have to provide to those new residents.
That's a good point.
Consistent guidelines, Mitch and I have talked a lot about this, and we're already working on it, but, by developing established cost-benefit ratios, you can then apply structure for acceptable incentive parameters. So when he works with a company, and you've, as a group, said, well, within the cost-benefit acceptable structure, you can do X, Y, and Z. But if you want to do something else, you've got to come back to the county council to do that. So that's kind of the point of getting a consistent guideline, so that you know what's going to be done with qualified projects, right? So they got to be qualified for that. But it just gives some order to the chaos that a lot of times is economic development. I'll be the first to admit that. You never know what your competitor's doing. You never know what the company's doing a lot of times. You're sometimes guessing, but at least in a structured format, you would know kind of where Mitch would be able to operate within those guidelines. And then those should align with your long-term goals. Those parameters should reflect your long-term economic development goals and then tactics that you employ to get there. For example, giving additional benefit to targeted industries. If you're truly targeting the industry, then you want to create a situation where you're saying, yes, higher wages, we're going to reward that better with more incentives. Particular job industry sectors, we're going to provide additional incentive to. But it just gives you a benchmark. And that's, a lot of times communities don't have that. And there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of how this is applied. So,
I have one question. Of course, I never have one question, but I'm just going to do one
I'll ask
question.
you a second question.
Okay, please do. this, first of all, this is great, and I love it, the fact that, I think you broke it down well, and it really focuses on the companies that are larger, right, in of certain size and qualification. The question that always comes to me is a small business owner. You know, what does the state offer to small businesses, right? And that's always the biggest question that comes across the plate. I know this is not the time for it, but I just want to throw that out to you. So if there's anything else that you could gather to bring back
Yeah,
to me and the team here, that would be amazing.
a lot of local development organizations, Tom, struggle with that.
Yeah,
I did that in Greenville, you know, my board said the same thing, what are we doing for small businesses? We did an inventory and found that there were 24 organizations in Greenville, between the state and the county, that served small business. So, and Mitch has rightly suggested that we do more for those groups, but you need to think about what you can do. You know, within the guidelines of this legislation, you have a hammer, and most everything is a nail. So you have property taxes, and unless you choose to start providing some kind of discretionary incentive to those small companies within the guidelines of that legislation, there are limits.
right, right,
So,
right.
so this legislation, granted, is not designed for small business. Not saying you couldn't develop a program to benefit those small businesses,
Yeah,
but, I mean, technically, you could put a convenience store in a multi-county industrial park.
right.
And if you wanted to, you could issue infrastructure credits, as long as it's not owner-occupied housing, the state will allow you to do that. Richland County, South Carolina, I may have mentioned this, I think maybe last time, Richland County figured that the University of South Carolina was an asset and they needed student housing. So they went to a developer and they encouraged the developer to build student housing for the students at USC, owned by the developer privately. But Richland County issued infrastructure credits to incent that developer to build those student housing. So you have a broad scope of things that you potentially could do, and if you chose to do that for small business, you could even do it there.
Right.
But, you know, you gotta be careful about, are you adding real value to those small businesses? If you find a way to do that, absolutely, pursue it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But a lot of this legislation is not designed for that.
Well, and again, I just want to throw it out at you, if you could think of other things or whatever it may be, that would be great, because it's always the toughest question to answer.
My first project in consulting was the Swamp Rabbit Cafe in Greenville. They bought a building that was not appropriately zoned. And so I helped them get a rezoning for that building for their commercial bakery.
Yeah.
I also put it in a multi-county industrial.
Well, there you go. There you go.
So,
Yeah.
and now, they're a little bit unique because all of their sales are in South Carolina. So they retained a significant portion of property, or of corporate income tax liability that they could get. They were creating 28 new jobs, I think. So they could get those credits to be used against their liability for corporate income because all their sales were in South Carolina.
Okay.
But multi-county also gave them some discretion going forward about how they might reinvest in that site and what the county may do to help them grow a small business.
Right.
So, and that was the argument that I made to council, and they accepted it and put them in there. But it's a tool that is pretty widely used in South Carolina because it opens up so many doors.
Okay.
You don't have to walk through all those doors.
Yeah.
And as long as you walk in with your eyes open, then that's great. I mean, you know, some communities don't do that. I'll be the first to admit. Some communities will give 100% infrastructure credit.
Yeah.
They're basically buying the job.
Right.
They're not thinking about the cost that those new residents or that company might create to the community. They just want the jobs, and they're willing to do almost anything to get it. So that's how competitive it is, you know, in South Carolina, especially if they're maybe a less developed community. The community can do, in the confines of that multi-county industrial park legislation, they can be very aggressive.
Okay. Good. Well, that's good information, and whatever else you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, take 2 minutes and talk about abatements right quick.
So abatements are statutory in South Carolina. Before any of the fee in lieu of legislation was even considered, you know, the textile companies and the other legacy companies in South Carolina were complaining about how high property taxes were, because at a 10.5% assessment, we've all paid property taxes on our cars and looked at it and thought, "God, that's incredible that I'm paying that much." So the state adopted an abatement conveniently for counties that allowed the company to qualify for 5 years for an abatement of county taxes only. So if you get the abatement for a 5-year period, if you're a qualified operation, for the first 5 years you pay 0 to the county. Okay? You pay to the schools, you pay to the other taxing entities that are part of that millage, but for the first 5 years, the company, a qualified company, will pay the county 0 in terms of their millage.
And that can be triggered by the state. The state can actually, no?
Well, the legislation is in place. It's not discretionary. If you qualify, for example,
So
if
a company could request an abatement before we offer anything, and I guess if the state approved it, then we're out of taxes. for
but
5 years.
the state wouldn't have to approve it.
It's automatic.
Now, the fee and multi-county and SSRC process allows you much more discretion to be aggressive with that company. You know, the abatement provides a reduction of about 20% for a 5-year period, and that's a rough approximation
Right.
based on what the percentage of the millage rate is throughout the state. So the abatement is something that they get exclusive of the fee. So if they get a fee in lieu of tax with you all, they can't qualify for the abatement. But if you choose not to offer them a fee, or multi-county or SSRC, they, assuming they have the jobs, and in manufacturing, it's 10 jobs, distribution, it's 75 jobs, and in an office project, it's 125 jobs. So those are the parameters. If the company is creating that number of jobs, they automatically qualify. Okay? So now, they're not going to take them up on it all the time, because they're hoping that they'll be able to negotiate a fee in lieu of tax, a multi-county agreement, and an SSRC with the county, which would be more rewarding for them.
Okay. Christie, any questions? Anything you want to add, Mitch?
No, it's been helpful. Mark's a wizard with some of this stuff, so.
For sure. You made one comment, it's unrelated to the presentation, but you mentioned rentals. So if you gave incentives to a developer to create affordable housing, let's say, that doesn't have to be any type of
Yes,
it does.
yes. You would, in that scenario, you're creating again, now, you know, if the company went out and built rental apartments, then, you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to give them a fee in lieu of that.
Right.
What you would do if you wanted to incent some affordable units, you'd basically put it in a multi-county industrial park and negotiate with them what that, you know, a lot of times in the federal statutes, 80, 60-40, you've seen all that, I'm sure, but you would be at the local level able to say, if you build these units at this price point, you know, fluctuating basically on, you know, annual basis based on whatever interest rate is at the time, we would provide you with X or Y incentive. So you could do that. Now, a lot of communities are doing that because affordable housing is all the rage. And you know, it is something you need to do carefully if you decide to do that, because what you do is set a precedent. And if I were a developer and you did that for that guy, I would sure want you to do it for me, you know, coming along with the next deal. So you just need to have, but again, if that developer is willing to meet your long-term goals of affordable housing,
Yeah, whatever that number is, 2,000, 5,000,
Exactly.
whatever it is.
now you have to discover that. You have to do some due diligence to make sure that,
Yeah.
you know, once that's met, you say, okay, well, this is off the table now.
Correct.
You know, we've done our part in terms of developing affordable housing, so, you know, this is the parameters of that program.
Makes sense. Okay.
Does that have to go through SC Housing Authority?
No, property taxes are completely a local jurisdictional issue.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? You guys have any questions of Mark?
May I ask Mark a
Yes,
question?
sir. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, welcome this evening, by the way.
Thank
you.
No place I'd rather be.
That's right, that's good. What would your view or vision be at this juncture for having a structured incentives program? I know in in my mind, and you hit all the big keywords, target industry, which is part of strategy and long-term goals. And then, you made an important, use an important word, qualifications. Could you visualize a structure for local incentives where if the jobs, the average or median pay in those jobs and the capital investment can be in a calibrated schedule where the better the mix of those three are, you might say the sweeter the incentives get. And then maybe as part of the qualification, you do a stress test on the company and see what the economic impact's going to be and the fiscal impact. And maybe something that you didn't cover this evening, but it's a longer conversation, is clawbacks. So can you visualize a structure like that here?
Yes, and you have complete discretion to do any of that, and all of that.
Or
So you
deviate,
could-
or
you
deviate
could-
from the schedule.
You could, exactly, you could adopt this guideline, not necessarily a policy, but, a rough approximation of where you want Mitch to go with this. And then there's a company called Fabrique Nationale. Does anybody know them? Know what they make? They're in Pickens County right now because they tried to go to Richland County, and Richland County Council would not give them a fee in lieu of tax because they make guns. So the company got frustrated. Pickens County picks up the phone and says,
I'll take 'em.
we love you. And so they went from Richland to Pickens overnight, basically, and said, absolutely, we're coming. And so, but it was their discretion, Richland County's discretion. They said, there you go. I mean, that's that. But yes, you can structure that in any weighted portion that you wanted to do on a matrix, and then still, if it were something, well, for whatever reason, you said, well, this doesn't fit with us. You can still. It's all discretionary.
Or this is the mother of all projects, and you go off the chart
Exactly.
together with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very good point because I'm sure they went off the rails to get BMW. I mean, at the time, the BMW deal was lambasted in the Wall Street Journal talking about $125,000 per job of incentive, set the record, blah, blah, blah. 2 years later, Mercedes gets 250 in Alabama. And, it was crazy to do that. And of course, it's not crazy because there are 100 and something suppliers in the upstate region because of BMW, and the same in Tuscaloosa, and the same in Charleston with the Sprinter van and Volvo. So anyway, but yes, when you get to that point where you've got that iconic kind of project, you can, at your discretion, at the council's discretion, say, yeah, we want to do more.
All right, anything else, Tom?
No,
Josh?
sir, thank you.
Okay, Mark, really appreciate it.
Thank y'all.
Very much. Very good, go ahead.
What is our plan for, obviously it was just a presentation, but this is something that could take a good long while to, I love what you're saying. This is something that we've been trying to talk through as a council for years now, especially, some council members live in, well, their district's different, right? One example is, in District 2, there was always this push. How do we attract some restaurants instead of businesses? But businesses are allowed to go there that you may not want to have there. The only way you can really counter it, to me, without being unconstitutional about it, is to offer, be a little creative with those things. So to me, it would require you kind of taking a map and having, and this is almost a collective council discussion about where do we want to see certain things, what do we need more of here, what do we not, and that could take a good bit of conversation. So I don't know what our plan is going forward, but
See future discussions, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes.
We gotta circle back to it.
Thank you. Yes,
all
ma'am.
right.
Thank you for
Thanks,
mentioning
Mark.
that. Thanks, Mark.
Thank y'all.
We'd love for you to hang around. if you'd like.
Absolutely.
I know you're already down.
I know you'd just love to be here.
All right, moving along on the agenda. So tonight, we're going to discuss the Economic Development Fund and what are our priorities for that fund. So Mitch, I'm going to turn it to you, please, sir. Sure. You'll kick us off here, then we'll engage everybody in the room in this discussion.
Yeah, I have to, and I think you all honestly kicked it off already. When we talk about priorities or what we may want to see in a district, I know Watts had reached out to you all to be prepared to talk about what are some things that are important to you? What are some things that you would want to focus on looking at the ED fund? We internally as a staff, we've started working on a survey that we can distribute out, that I really wanted to allow you all to have a conversation tonight to shell out some ideas and talk about what's important so we can include that in that survey and ask the council as a whole. So I don't know what more I can add to that other than, based off your email, I'd love to hear your opinions as we talk about what are priorities for the ED fund. We talked a lot about whether it be land acquisition, we talked about supporting small business, creative ways to offer incentives. I think anything can be on the table, but really would love to hear what your vision and what your thoughts are. If you had, the pen and the pad to draw it out, what would that look like?
And that's part of the reason why we took the time to go over incentives tonight, because I didn't want to assume that any of us understood how incentives work. So you've got the backstory now, still maybe a little gray. But now you're going to be asked to say, okay, if we have a fee in lieu, if we award a fee in lieu, that funds the ED fund. And with that being, that funding the ED fund, what do you want the ED funds to do? So that's the question on the table tonight. So we can start with the committee, or we can go to staff, because I've asked economic development and staff to come prepared with suggestions on what you think that money should be invested in. Y'all want to start with the committee, or you want to go to staff? Matter to you?
I'm ready to start. You guys want to just get her going?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think I'm going to rank this, kind of, but each of them have a value, so they obviously can share. So I think my first thought would be to purchase land. All right, and what I mean by that is an industrial park opportunity. We had an opportunity, Watts and I, probably, what was that, 2 years ago now? We went to Belmont, and we went, Gastonia, excuse me. And we toured, or we had a view of their facility and their industrial park that they put together, and how they brought in companies that were of their vision and what they felt was the best fit for their area. And how they use tax incentives and et cetera to build out the facilities to have it basically as a welcome pad for these companies to come in. I was impressed with it, and they got the companies, they were able to pick and choose the companies they felt were going to fit into their vision. And I think, to me, I think that it's a long-term solution, but property, we don't grow any more property, right? Land doesn't, we can't actually grow any more land. Land's being eaten up as we speak. Land, to me, is always an investment, and always a good investment, because again, essentially, if we never use the property, we could sell it for profit and put it back into the county, okay? So I'm gonna just say land purchase would be my first one.
Land purchase and
Yeah.
site prep is what I heard you say.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to just read my 4, and then we can move on. The second one would be investment into small business and mid-sized business. All right, and what I mean by that is obviously the toolkit is the first step to getting knowledge out there, to have people understand what to do, where to go, who to talk to, etc. We can then kind of hone in on areas of small business where, and it kind of parallels a little bit with the question I asked Mark, is how can we be creative with our small businesses, all right? I'm not saying that we would be giving out loans or we'd be giving out grants. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying I think that we need to be knowledgeable in the creative opportunities, and we can invest some of our money into addressing those needs and be very attuned to what small businesses want, and we could be a very big attractor for small businesses. Now, the biggest challenge, obviously, is Act 388 with small businesses. Again, there's our challenge, but what is the offset? Okay, this is not a question to be answered now, but those are the things that we could start applying those funds towards to address that. That would be my number 2. The third thing is parks, economic development in parks. My vision on parks is that parks is not only is a tourism draw, but it's a quality of living opportunity, right? The better parks you have, the more draw it is for people that want to come here, but it's also an attractor for businesses, all right? So the quality of living broaches the value of what they can bring to their employees if they move a business into that area. So investment into parks, you know, on an economic mindset value, I think would be my third third in the line of ideations. Lastly, is agriculture, all right? I know we've talked about that in many different ways. I think that there's opportunity for presence of ag from within our community to make us, York County, be still a destination for bringing in specialty agriculture. So, as we had talked about before, on 5 acres of land, people can make a living off of that. How do we expand that opportunity to make that a very viable economic opportunity for everybody? And then lastly, you know, I know we have an arena that we're looking at to help fund and those types of things. So I think that ag is my fourth one. And then we can think about the ideations that we'd like to apply to it. So there's my top 4 list, guys.
Okay,
All right?
thank you, Tom.
You got it.
Kristen?
So the way I feel about, and I assume that we're talking about the ED FELO fund, not
Yes.
the C fund
Right.
part, because that provides road infrastructure improvement, and I think that I've always felt like, and I don't know, Mark, how many folks in the state carve off 10% of their FELO awards and use that as a fund?
Most communities, Christie, will have, and it was, I don't even know how it began. I had it, not 10%. So it varies in terms of how they do it, and the percentage and the use. But I would have to do an inventory, but most developed counties are doing it. Chester's doing it. I mean, even some of the more rural ones are.
That's how they're funding it, is through the,
Yes.
taking it off of FELO. What is the normal, what's the 10 is
I don't
high?
know. I
It's
don't
10
know.
high.
I don't know. I mean, of course, if you say 10, does that mean 10 from the county portion or 10 from the entire amount? Or does that mean 10 from
10 from the entire amount.
the entire amount is high?
Okay. And so I'll just say, I've always struggled with, because those taxes would normally, and for instance, New Indy was one of those ones that actually had a downsizing, and it's one of the larger ones that contributes to the FELO fund. So I say at the outset that I think that this fund was created so that we can try to do something visionary, so that to me, when it was done, it was to look at something bigger. And I will say that if we don't land on something that I think really develops or pushes the needle, or that gives back to all of the folks who are the 10% being taken from, I would think that we would just eliminate it. So that's how strongly I feel about it, because it is a lot of money that could be going to other entities that need it. But I would say that the top for me is looking at either an acquisition or looking at an option for infrastructure improvements. I think all of those things kind of go together to some extent, but I think we need to be looking at it in specific areas, and I think it needs to be somehow tied to workforce development and somehow tied to our schools. And at the ones that I remember going and seeing in Spartanburg and Greenville, they really had a group together that was really leveraging that. And I think that's the only way we're going to really be able to leverage funding with the state, is if we have some really large idea that pulls a lot of folks together. And I think you got to do it in a place where, I think the hard part is going to be, is council going to be able to agree on where that should go, what it should look like, and that can always be difficult. And I think obviously that has to be parsed out. I do very much agree with Tom on how do we address small businesses. I'd like to see us do a little bit more of marketing and not necessarily use the ED funds for that purpose, but I mean, I think you could carve off a small amount and say, have someone who's available to help with planning and zoning navigation, or to have, you know, I know that the city does facade improvements. If you are willing to put up a certain amount, you can apply for a grant for something like that. I guess I wouldn't be opposed to that if it were a small amount.
So you're talking about ED project grants or something like that, for center?
Right, I mean, I think I could see some very small portion of that. And I agree with, I think inside of doing something, I'm hoping we do something that's visionary. I hope that we look at one, maybe, you know, I know when David Swinson talked to us a good bit, he said, you know, they aren't making land anymore. How are you going to collaborate and find one parcel that you can kind of pool all of the resources and get everybody together to be working on some kind of unity across the board. So that's what I'm hoping that we move towards. I know before I came here, I talked with some of the council members because I didn't know you were going to do a survey, and I do want to ask some questions about that, but just kind of taking the pulse of what they think, because I don't want to be off base, and I think that there's at least one who just doesn't think we need to get in the business of property acquisition. I think the others are open to that, but I think that's probably going to be the hardest conversation we have. So, and I do think that with parks and agriculture, those are things that we have other funding sources for. But I liken the agriculture to the small business as well, and I really think we should move on highlighting our existing agriculture businesses. I think that's a huge way to just highlight. A lot of people don't even know our business, that link that was done. So I feel like I've echoed a lot of what, you know, Tom has said. But as I look at it, I've gone back and looked at where we did the spec investment and that sort of thing. We've done a lot of that throughout the county. A lot of them were successful, especially if they were in the right place. The one where we had trouble was when you try to put it too far in an area where it's too out of place. You kind of need to be centrally located to where things are happening. And I think the more we have a plan, I know I keep talking a lot, but I think if we invest in the place where you know you're going to have interest and you're going to have business come, and if we can do something to where we're actually investing in something and attract something that's higher quality than what we would have gotten if we just waited and did nothing, that's where I think it has benefit. And then if you have a plan to where it's not just one area that gets it, but later we're going to go here, you know, in 10 years, we're going to do this place. I think that's where it makes it easier for council to not feel like somebody's being excluded. So,
Good points, thank you. All right, let's go to the economic development office. What suggestions did y'all come? And
You're not gonna talk?
Yeah, I want to let everybody else talk, because y'all already mentioned some I was going to say.
I'll be happy to stick on staff if that's
Okay.
okay, and
That'd be
then
great.
go into you or anyone else.
Okay, thank you.
I think as we look at opportunity, collaboration is probably the biggest word that keeps popping up. And I'll really relate that to anything that I speak here. If we are going to look at site acquisition, which I do think it can be a very, very important tool in it and something that we should consider, collaboration with, you know, development partners. So that way we're not carrying that burden and it's not all in York County. That could also be collaboration with municipal partners as well, and bringing them to the table so we're sharing those costs and sharing the services costs as well. I do believe that in collaboration, municipal partnerships are extremely important. You know, I know several of you all have been having meetings with some of our municipal partners. I've been doing that as well. Specifically, I think it's an opportunity there to look at small business. Every single community within York County has a facade grant program. I do think there's some things that we could do there from a small business standpoint to support that and really look at the core part of those main streets, those downtowns, to bring life back. I do think too, from a marketing standpoint, this fund really opens up the door to really think about who we are and what we want to become, and part of that brand awareness with that. So if we want to focus on small business, if we want to focus on ag, I do think we can take a portion of those funds and really look to how do we support them, how do we talk about them, and give them the ability to kind of showcase not just themselves, their experience in York County. And then lastly, workforce support and community readiness. I think those are critical. We've got to be prepared for investment. It starts with the individuals that are going to be, ultimately filling those jobs when companies come into our community. So whatever we can do from that perspective, I think it always gives us an edge out if we find partners like what we've done with the chamber and others, and find ways to invest in that.
Okay, that's great. Love it. Okay, Josh, Tom?
We're in full support of staff's ideas, and I think Mitch and his team have put in a lot of work on this. What I would add is just a sense of realism in terms of the amount of money we're talking about. So we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. We had our CFO update his projections in the ED fund spreadsheet. So we do have 3 to 4 million in there right now, but the way we tend to think about this is what's the debt capacity into the future. And so if y'all think about 25% of it being used for these other things, and this is just an estimate for y'all to think about. 25% of it used for other things and 75% used for land, for example, or whatever you want to use the debt for. And the term being a 20-year term, it really, in terms of what we expect to pull in and what we have right now, you're looking at probably only 10 to 12.5, $15 million. So it's not a ton of money. That's a lot of money. It's millions of dollars. We're thankful for that. But I think going back to the collaboration and the partnerships, I think this is an opportunity for us to partner and think about something, but not something that's, that's a ton of money when you talk about land purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important to keep in mind. And if you do it for just, if you think about the amount of land you're interested in, I think that's something that would be good for you all to talk about as a committee. So over leveraging this to some degree will limit our ability into the future if you're thinking about a 20-year term. Kevin's obviously happy to talk with you more about this in the next meeting. He's going to be reaching out to our financial advisors too.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want y'all just to get those ballpark numbers with what we're seeing. Now, if all of a sudden we start getting more FILOs and we've got some big companies moving in, then that will generate more revenue. You could do more with that in the future.
Josh, I didn't mean, the one thing I do want to make sure that I say is in some of the discussions that we've been having that council has asked us to do with ED, one of the things that I know that it seems to be consistent from our delegation is they don't typically invest in acquisitions. They invest in infrastructure. So really the county almost has to have the parcel locked down in some form or fashion, and then that's how you go to the state to get that infrastructure. And I don't want to challenge, I guess I am going to challenge it. The numbers, I thought we had $4.5 million currently in the fund and 1.2 that is annually that adds to it. So that would seem to me to be more than.
Right, so remember every year, and this is in the budget, there's already about $1 million that we use out of the ED fund for current operations. Some of that goes to our good friends at the chamber. So we're using $1 million a year. So right now, if we're getting 1.2 and we're spending $1 million, we're only adding 200 some odd thousand a year. And this is where we're happy to put this spreadsheet up on the screen next meeting to give you all more details.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
But we're utilizing this fund currently. And so the differential we're creating every year is not the 1.2.
So one quick comment, though, when it came to land purchase, though, there was and maybe there still is an opportunity, though, with the state as far as getting some type of fund matching funds from the state.
There's money.
For
I'm not
purchase.
saying there's not money. I'm just saying there's not. If we go and look to see what our debt capacity is, it's in the 10 to 15 million range.
Right.
That's what
Right.
Kevin said. So
But
I'm
it's, right. Well, I'm just saying, if we do go down that road with the land purchase, I think obviously we need to get that back with the state to see what we can do as far as any matching funds.
That stole my thunder. I was just going to say strategically, no matter what programs, products you choose to invest in, it's to the county's advantage to see leverage through sponsored funding, whether it's state, federal,
Yes.
other means, because that will just bolster our ability to do some good and big things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and after talking to our financial advisors, he's willing to give you all the more information, so.
Okay, that's perfect. All right, well, I'm not going to mention what's already been mentioned, because I've made notes, and I think you're making notes, and Karen's definitely making notes. So I'll share a few things. Number one, I think whatever we do, it ought to have a measurable economic impact. So we need to know what the return on the investment is going to be for making the investment and whatever we invest in. I wrote down specifically Main Street facade funding. A lot of the municipalities already have this, so we'd have to do some research to understand what's being done. I noticed in here in the Small Business Digital Toolkit, Sharon is a municipality, but yet Sharon's not in this. Sharon does have a Main Street somewhat. And so, anyway, they need to be included in this as well. And there could be facade improvements even over there. So, but I also believe in whatever we do, Josh, I think that we incorporate two things. Number one, we cap out the amount we're looking to invest and the time we're going to invest. So this thing is not ongoing indefinitely. It could be if council decides or ED decides they want to extend it, but I think we have to be careful committing to anything long term. I think it makes sense, because I've seen this firsthand since I've been on council. There are companies that are operating in York County that would like to expand, meaning they want to take their $10 million company to a $20 million company. How can we carefully invest in the cost of them exploring this with a cap? I think that's important. And you've got companies that actually want to double in size and open up a second location. So how do we invest in that opportunity with limitations? Same thing that was said, but I'm going to say this a little differently. Purchasing land, but properly vetting the land that we're purchasing, understanding what is the unintentional, intentional cost of getting that land prepared to actually develop. Along the same lines, I think Christy was might touch on a little bit of the opposite of what you were saying, but the unincorporated area of York County it's going to be developed one day. So where should we be strategically looking for land that, and that leads to the next one, and that is that we could pay the debt service on. We purchase it with tax revenue, combined leverage funding, like you said, Tom. But how can we pay the debt service on that land while we're waiting for that day to come around when we can develop it? And then, Tom, I'm going to touch base on what you said, but a little differently. The unique thing about Gastonia is Gastonia buys land and they grade the land, prep the land, it's pad ready. So they are ready to move. They actually get someone to come into Gaston County, hire a contractor and get started. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
We can't do that here in York County,
Well,
so I think it's something we need to explore.
There you go.
Let's see. I think you mentioned the marketing, so I'm not gonna touch on that. And I think that pretty much covers it. Everything else was said. Last thing, more specifically, you all know the time that I spent on ag for 2 years for the county council back in 2017 on the committee. And I think if we're going to invest in ag, we need a comprehensive plan on what we're saying about investing in ag. I think it's a very broad topic, and I think we need, as a council, if this is something we want to pursue, I think we'll need to clearly define what it is we're looking to achieve. And is there a return on the investment? And in what areas is there a return on the investment? At a facility, the businesses that complement the facility, the farms that operate in our county, how are we helping them be more successful? What's our end goal in agriculture here for the county, and how can we actually meet that goal? What is it going to take to step into success? And we haven't defined that yet. So I think there's a ton of work to be done there before we consider investing in agriculture personally. That's really it for me. Anybody else come to mind while we wrap this part up?
I would like to ask about the survey, just because normally, we've been sending out surveys lately, and there's been no discussion about it. It's like, so I'm not even sure if, what I'm thinking when the words are being presented to me, if I'm seeing it the same way. So I don't know. Can you tell us a little bit about the survey?
Yeah, I just jotted down some questions that I thought would be pertinent to ask, and I wanted to get feedback from y'all. So one, wanted to collect, whatever information that were priorities important for you, want to make it simple, and I want to give it to y'all to review before I send it out to anybody. I think coming from the committee is probably the biggest priority rather than coming directly from me.
So while you're on that, let's just go ahead and tackle future discussions, because this is where you were gonna talk about that. So let's go ahead and do that right quick. Is that okay?
Sure.
And then we're gonna go back to the ED board.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So going into future discussions, just in terms of like the survey, I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow you there.
Survey.
Yeah, so, again, it was just jotting ideas, and I'm trying to think, how can we be the most productive with the time that we have, to make sure that we get the right information on paper, and are all going in the right direction. And so, we have 3 council members here, obviously, there's members of 7. And so, from my perspective, let's collect the information that's priority important to you all, let's put that together in a list, and use that as a framework to then give out to the 7 and see what else we're missing, or maybe what ranks higher, and where if it's land acquisition and that ranks extremely high, and we prioritize that as we talk about a plan. Because I'm with you, I do believe having some type of a structured plan about where we're going is important. If we don't have it, I'm just doing circles, and we're all doing circles together, and it's not going to be productive.
I mentioned I wanted to hear from you guys tonight. What future discussions do you want to have on this, on our ED committee? What's on your mind that we need to be discussing? I know land purchase, definitely for you. Anything else?
The only other thing, and we're already talking about, is the correlation between economic development and planning and zoning. I think that piece, that linkage is incredibly important.
Yeah, agreed. Christie?
My mind's just going towards the practicalities, because we have, and so I don't want to, I have to understand where we're headed from here. To me, I think that we would come out of committee, maybe we need to make, I don't know, I don't want to, maybe we need to make a motion and say we want to present this do we have a recommendation? I'm trying to figure out how we advance this ball without going to I think if we go to a survey and then we got to report then we got to have another meeting to report the survey, and how do we put the council in? I would think that would probably be something that we would do either in the next few workshops or at the retreat, which.
How about if we get the list typed up and get that out to you guys, that we all just shared collectively, let you review it, see if you're okay with what you see, because it might have been interpreted differently. And if you're comfortable with it, then we can share that with council. There's our first step towards what we're interested in potentially investing in. Was anything mentioned? I was the last one to say something. Was anything mentioned that either one of you are opposed to?
I think we got a long list.
No,
Are we just making a really, really long list? Is that what we're doing?
So what I hear is that y'all are trying to get a sense of priorities from the entire council as you consider your deliberations. That's what I'm
So,
hearing.
right, so let me read you for a second on this one. We come out, you finalize the list, and we're gonna bring it to our workshop. Is that?
Next Tuesday?
Yeah. Is that what
Good,
you-
yeah.
is that what you think?
Is that okay, Mitch, you think?
Yeah.
Mark?
Do we have time to do the 2 things that are already on that agenda? Is that part of this? I'm fine with doing that.
Is this survey part of our agenda for the workshop?
No, I'm
Yeah.
trying to make sure. I like that, I hear what you're saying. Pull together the list. Typically, the council would go back to the council meeting and report it out, but we can skip that. Especially, you're not gonna be here at the retreat. I wanna make sure that there's enough input. But if the list is here's a whole list, and now let's have council discuss which
Right.
are the priorities.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
I
that
think
how
it
you
would be,
want to do
we've talked, we'll come out with a list, and if we can fit it into your busy schedule.
This is up to y'all how late you want to be here next week. That's Christie, we got a pretty full
I know.
agenda already, so I'm open to adding another conversation, because next Tuesday is all about deliberation. Y'all are going to be doing a lot of talking next week.
Well, how comfortable are you in ranking the thing that you talked about? Are we
Comfortable, and I think we can introduce it, and if it looks like this discussion is gonna go too long, then we'll put it off and discuss it at our county council meeting or the next workshop.
Yeah,
We
I'm
don't have to
good,
rush through it.
yeah, I'm good with
We'll
that.
make steps forward.
What I was meaning is, do we have an idea of what we want to rank? Are we prepared to rank the top 5?
How
Agree?
about,
Do a recommendation
I
out
know
of
my
here
ranking.
that's,
Yeah, I'm good with it.
we'll get you to rank it. Just rank them all and see where we all rank.
Yeah.
them.
As a
right
committee,
now?
I think that's good.
We're not gonna take it up now. After this meeting, we'll get you a list, and then you can rank it. I like that idea.
Yeah, I took notes and I'm gonna rewatch just to make sure I'm not missing anything that anybody
Mhm.
mentioned. But I can see where there's consensus between the three of you all, and if you want us to include staff, we can do that too.
Yep. All right, under this section, I had 3 items I wanted to mention, and that is, I think we're at the point where we need to, maybe we'll all agree, I don't know, but we need to be future forward. We need to be thinking about the future, obviously, of economic development in York County. That's going to lead us towards what our targeted industries, what industries do we want to intentionally attract to York County? So we need to lead to that discussion. And then the last thing, this really came from conversations Josh and I have had since he joined the county back in April. And that is putting a master plan together for town centers and business parks in mostly the unincorporated areas of York County. We talk about this being an attractive place for people to come. So my feeling is that right now, Lake Wiley's a little different, but right now we have an opportunity. We don't have to run at this. We don't have to walk. We can crawl towards this because we're not going to have water, sewer. You're not going to have infrastructure out in an unincorporated area of the county for a while. You're not going to get the roads widened, need to be widened to 4 lanes or whatever. Highway 5's already that way, but you got to get infrastructure out there. So we have time to potentially put a master plan together on town centers and commercial and business parks. So to be intentional about it. So I'd like to suggest that this Economic Development Committee think about, not tonight, think about us hiring someone that has experience in putting together master plans. Because when you look at the unincorporated areas of the county, and that's the area that's going to develop long term, what is it going to look like? And we don't know. And we complain about Cherry Road, Highway 49, Fort Mill, and we have a chance to avoid that, completely avoid that, but we have to be intentional. So I'd like for us to consider in our budget coming up, funding to hire a consultant, to hire someone that's experienced in master planning, and help us sort of put a master plan together for York County that includes the business parks and land purchases we're talking about tonight. You don't have to react tonight.
No, I mean,
I think that
I'm
would be
just
appropriate
noting.
to bring up Tuesday. I
Yeah.
think it's one of the
Completely
questions.
agree.
Yeah,
Completely agree.
no, I think that's good.
So we're in agreement on that? So we'll bring that up?
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
yep,
Anything
We're in
else?
agreement and bringing it up.
Bringing it up. Okay.
bringing it up.
And
So you got it through door number 1.
offline, I could talk more about it, but for us as an organization though, we need more staff to do
That's
future
fine.
land use too.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily just going to hire a consultant. I would say that, Tom and I have had conversations just this week with the planning department about the need to have in-house talent to do more of this.
Sure. That's right.
We talked about the need for more transportation planning from the county as well. But I do think when you think about Carowinds Boulevard, other areas, there's an opportunity to rethink some of these places. And there's a high return on investment if we do it well. We've got to start at some point. And in some places it might be too late, but I'm open to that conversation. I think it's a good idea to talk about, great idea to bring up next week.
And another, again, infrastructure, again, plays a role in this, it plays a big role, especially when you start looking at infrastructure off of Carowinds Boulevard, and how if someday down the road, we can have an off-ramp right into Carowinds Boulevard, and we make Carowinds just like their own little resort, it's just that. Anyways, roads are important.
Exactly.
One, I guess, comment on this, and that is, last budget year, what we anticipated was being at the spot we're in right now. Knowing that we put a strategic plan in place, knowing that we put our committee structure back in place, we are considering what it is this county needs to be doing that we haven't been doing. And what we knew last year was that was going to cost us money, unfortunately. And so we have to prioritize the best we can for our immediate planning, our mid-range planning, and our long-range planning, and all that costs money. So unfortunately, the county's in a bit of a compromise situation that we have operated as an extremely conservative county. We have had a very tight budget, and when you operate lean, when you decide that you've got to get ahead of planning, that's probably going to cost you some money temporarily. So I think the discussion of the master plan for the county, I just don't see this as something that we should, it's not something we should put off, it's something we should take seriously. And then you got to backfill it with staff, obviously, which is an expense there too. So I'm just commenting on what you said.
Yep.
Now, why don't we, are y'all okay with deferring the economic development board conversation to the next meeting, so we'll do an executive session? So you want to hit it?
Yeah, and here's, I don't want to belabor this, but, I mean, future discussions, I never know what that means, and I'm always cognizant of like how, so raising this question of a master plan, and that's more of a budgetary concern, still me not fully understanding exactly what y'all have talked about beforehand to know what do we need there, and understanding that there's some things that council's got to make a decision about strategic-wise before we get there. That's my only, I don't mean to say, no, I would never be receptive to it. I just don't, I think it's more appropriate to bring it up Tuesday, and also, I'd like to see us get some things done, and I'm glad that we're moving the ball forward, and one of the things was the board, and so I would like
Let's do it. Hit it.
Okay.
You speak first.
The only thing I do think that it is unfortunate that we have not had a board, and I think more than anything, we talk about in our strategic plan, wanting to have community input, wanting to have more folks at the table, so that it doesn't just look like things are being shoved down your throat. And when investment's here, we need to start educating people, key strategic people, on incentives and all of these things, and so I think we're missing a huge opportunity by not having a board of some sort. Now, I don't know, maybe you guys have a different idea of what is the purpose, what's the board's purpose gonna be? I think that's always critical, and that's not, I really am not prepared to talk about that. The only thing that I know is that I do not like the idea of having folks who have a financial interest in whatever the outcome is that on the board. I'd rather, I mean, obviously, maybe that's hard to do. The main point I want to make is I want a board that allows at least each council member to have someone appointed to that board. And that's going to help get buy-in from the rest of the council. And I think the sooner we do something like that, because this is a big issue and everybody's invested in it. Nobody wants to feel left out. And so, because it can impact that area. So that's really the main thing I wanted to say is if we do it, I just want to make sure that each council member has equal representation on there, and that we probably need to spend some time thinking about what their job will be.
I 100% agree with it.
If I may, I thought I used to be on the Economic Development Board, but it was made up of representatives from large companies. So it was the people that were asked to give to the private-public fund. So you have somebody from Clear Springs and Piedmont.
That's the Growth Partners Board.
Growth Partners.
Yeah, that's.
I knew it was at your office, and I knew it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, the growth partners.
I was like, I thought I was on it.
That's a great board. But I agree. That is a great board.
We've actually had, and I'll just say this, I've been on council long enough that I got here, we had a board that was like 13 people, then we went to 18 people, then we went to no people, and then there was a push for a PPP, which I will not support. I'll just say that right here. I do not support the way it was going to be structured then. Maybe there's a different analysis, but anyway, sorry, Tom.
No, you're good. No, I just want to piggyback off your comments. I agree. I think a board is very important as we move forward. And I agree. I think that it should be balanced amongst each district. Each council member chooses their board member, and we keep it to a board of 7. So I think to me, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think that would be my approach, and that would be my feedback on that one.
Comments?
I just wanted you all to have, this is the ordinance that was adopted November 16th, 2015, that outlines membership. Wanted to give you that membership list. One of those individuals has passed away. I'm not even sure if every single one of these individuals even still live here. But the important thing is, in page 2 and page 3, it outlines the membership criteria. essentially, and I'm happy to read through those, or you can do that on your own. This at least gives us, the framework to look at, what was created, what was adopted. If we want to make changes, I'm sure we could as a group, put something together to make those recommendations and then this document. And that at least gets us to the step of getting this thing back in order. I'll be the first to say too, I think having a level of accountability from the community standpoint is a priority. It's something I definitely agree with and that we need to have. And I think as we do projects, that's our avenue to talk to the communities that these projects are going to be going in. And we think about the individuals who serve on this committee.
Exactly.
This committee changed, I don't think this is the most recent ordinance that we had. I think we gotta start with, there's been a lot of history here, and I have obviously a strong opinion on this. I think you can add to, but I think it's gonna be important to
I think
council.
this was the last one, because it went to 18 members, and that's what this is.
See,
Now, there were members that weren't, I guess when they rolled
They
off.
weren't showing up, that one was large, that was like 18 people, and then there was concerns about,
But I don't think there's another one.
I honestly think it should be one per keep it to 7 on the board. I think once you start getting beyond that, I think that there's logistics issues and other things. I feel like if we have one person per district, I think it's more succinct with each representative, so that's one person that they communicate, or whatever. I think it should be just one per district, that would be my thought.
I'll share my thoughts in just a second. Mark,
Sure.
you want to share anything on this topic?
Well, I think the purpose, you all you're in, this is the ED committee, so it should be, but you're kind of in some weedy details, right? And the board theoretically would be able to vet some of this and to say, as a community representative, we think these are some priorities that you need to consider. If there's a particularly sensitive topic, a lot of times I was fortunate enough to have a chair of the board that would support the will of the board, not just me. So that was awfully nice to have that kind of inclusion in terms of the community as a whole, and to have somebody who could help support Medich in that scenario, of course. So, and the great thing about it was we focused on geographic representation. We focused on the different accounting, engineering, and looking at this one. It looks like y'all followed that up until this point in terms of having small business. Had the Catawba Indians. So there was a benefit to the community. It was a benefit to the county council. Still, at their discretion, they appointed everybody, right? So they would be involved in that process, and they would say, yes, you can serve, and all the terms and everything is decided by them. So I think it is it's you kind of unique in South Carolina in that you don't. There are a few that doesn't, but most organizations have that kind of a group. It might be structured, everybody's structured differently, it seems, but I think it's an important asset for you.
I just thought of something as you were talking, was that another thing, again, I don't know if it's associated with this board, but you look at TGK as an economic development group. You've got Fort Mills got an economic group. We're sitting here having discussions of economic opportunities, but I think somehow we need to have joint conversations to see where they're running, that we're not duplicating, and that we're together we maybe come up with ideations that we may not have thought of. So I just want to throw that out.
And if you go to page 4 of the ordinance, you can tell that was the rendition of the board before it switched to the at-large seat. So it's pretty interesting to read this because it shows the evolution. So at one point it was exactly that. It was TK, Clover, Chamber, it was the York Chamber, the Fort Mill Chamber seats.
Okay.
So that's why this discussion is to happen. I would just ask if Tom could share some insight that he's.
I think you're going in the right direction of having representation from each of your districts. Although I think it's important, as this board is being formed, that they have a specific mission to work from.
Sure.
And I know that's being developed with Mitch and Mark and, you know, putting together plans. And I don't think that should prohibit you from maybe seeing what you want to do about this current ordinance. If it's a standing ordinance, you may want to rescind it and have something new. Or you may want to have something a little bit less formal, unless there's something in South Carolina law that prevents that. But I think before you make these appointments, you need to have a good fundamental mission or mission statement on where you want this board to go.
That's good. You want to say something else?
No, I'm gonna let you speak and then I'll ask you if I can say something after that.
Sure. I shared this a year ago when this came up under the last ED committee, and that is I can support a member representing our 7 districts. I have an issue with that. What concerns me though is that once we define what we want this board to do, I think the representation on the board should be more broad than 7 members from a district. I have a board, personally, 15 people that are executives and business owners, and they run $5 million businesses to $300 million businesses. And we meet once a month, and it is overwhelming sometimes, the power of the knowledge and the vulnerability, the willingness to share that impacts my business every time I go, once a month. And then I have lunches once a month with a member from that group too. So if your goal, don't read into this, I'm just saying, if your goal is to truly, intentionally get serious about economic development and what we're trying to accomplish here in York County, bring the right industry in with the right amount of capital that generates the right amount of taxes, if we're truly looking to do this intentionally, then I think you need to form a board that can help you achieve that. Right? You got a board of advisors that can help you achieve this. If you want to fall maybe on the side of controlling economic development and not developing the county out and slow playing development, then you probably want a board that is represented by the 7 members of county council. And you're gonna, no offense, because I'm not, we could get 7 incredible members on the economic development board, but I would venture to say we could still get those 7 and add some other people to the board that may challenge us in our thinking, ultimately we make the decision. They're not making decisions for us, they're just suggesting, they're educating us. They're causing you to think differently, to broaden your horizon and think differently about what we should be considering. So we don't make decisions like you said was made in Greenville County. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, but we have to be careful what industry we say we want to go after because we got to have the workforce to support it. We can't go after certain industries if we don't have the workforce to support it. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I
yes.
could make
Yes,
a
sir.
suggestion. Is it possible that each of the individual representatives of the council, you could maybe have a bigger board, but they could represent an executive committee of that board?
Right.
They could.
Yeah, that's what I was more thinking.
And I think that one of the things, and I think it's important to take this step because let's be real, there have been some issues with ED throughout the county, and I think there is a level of trust that has to be rebuilt, and there has been a history with the board composition. So I do think that the place to start, and maybe this doesn't mean that we rush to start the board, but I think if we have a recommendation coming out of committee tonight that we recognize that a board needs to be done, that the first iteration of the board will make sure every council member has equal representation. Then, once we have gotten down the road a little bit with some of these strategic planning discussions that we have to have, so that we have some information. They shouldn't just go in blind. They should at least hear from the council or what the majority of council is saying, at least part of that, and then delegate responsibilities. I think that might be a good transition, because I'm not opposed to the board having ex officio people later on, or even adding, industry specialists, and I think that can be a good thing. I'm just trying to take what we've learned from the past, and I think this will be a better way to move back into it. And it doesn't mean we have to, start appointing people to the board tomorrow. It just, I think, if I were gonna make a motion, I'd say, I move that we make a recommendation to council that we look at reconstituting the board with every council member having representation onto it, and that we'll revisit it to look at mission and those sorts of things after we get through some of the strategic planning.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could agree with that, but I would want us to go ahead and agree to the phase 2 or phase 3 and when it will take place. Otherwise, you're not setting an expectation. So I can go with what you're saying, but I'd like to see the expectation of phase 2 and phase 3 and by when.
But the reason I suggested one per council is because the more you have, the more challenge you may have with special interests. That's my biggest concern. So I think your ideation was good because we can have one council member per there, and then they could be allowed to have some type of subcommittee or people that they will refer out to, such as business owners for feedback and that type of thing. I just get concerned when you have more than one per council member, if there's going to end up being some type of special interest that may sway things. That's my thoughts.
So are you saying one representative per council member, and then we fill the rest of the board with strategic partners here in York County?
Well, I wouldn't say fill the board. I'd say they have an ability to have some type of subcommittee related to that board, right?
So you're saying that ED committee should be 7 members,
Period. Yeah, and then they have some type of subcommittee they can refer to.
What I heard Tom say was this could be the executive board, and you would have starting, did I hear that wrong? I mean,
we're trying to form this idea.
Yeah, but.
Map it out a little more, Tom,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, I think what you want to keep in mind is that you want to keep things manageable, because you already have a ED committee consisting of council members, and you don't want to create too many bureaucratic layers.
That's right.
And so I think if you were to go with the single member type of appointments, whether it's an executive committee or whether that's what you want the board to be, because Mitch has to work with the board, Mitch has to work with the 3 of you as the ED committee, and ultimately the county council as well. I think you have to be careful not to create too much inertia in the system, because the bigger it is, the less accountability you have, and maybe whatever I'm sensing went south with this arrangement before could happen again. So I always favor the KISS principle, but it doesn't mean that if you each pick a board member, that you can't allow them within their mission to go out and either seek or use the advice of others in the community, whether it's more formal subcommittees or you want to make a bigger board and make those 7 representatives the executive committee. That's kind of what you have to flush out, and I hear that you're trying to do that tonight as quickly as you can.
And I guess I do take issue with the idea that whoever's on the board, that somehow it translates to mean anything with what they would decide. That you seem to think that's a way to control it, slow it down. I think it's a way to get it started and start building trust, and then once we get kind of a working group together, then let's talk about how do we add, if we need to, how do we do that. But I don't know that I'm committed to say, okay, we're gonna look at that on August whatever, because I'm not really sure when. I think council's got a little bit of work to do before the board can even do anything.
That's
Sorry,
fair.
I'll respond real quickly. I, for one, I'm sensitive to only having a board of 7 members that are appointed by county council. I, for one, don't appoint anybody to micromanage them. I do not call them and tell them what I want them to do and how I want them to do it. I vet the person out before I appoint them, and I'm not saying anybody does this, I'm just telling you the way I do it. I vet them out before I appoint them, and they're off and running. They're not getting guidance from me. I'm not calling to say, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. I'm not saying this would happen, but I wouldn't want it to happen. I wouldn't want it to happen on this committee. I don't want it to happen on any committee anybody serves on as an appointee of a council member. So to me, to insulate against that, you wrap the committee with other people that have a strategic interest in the success of your county, that become advisors to you. I mean, AT&T doesn't pull together the CEO's friends to be on board. No. He or she pulls together the absolute best people they can that can help them to be a viable business long term. So I feel differently than you two do. I'm looking at it through a different lens, I guess. Doesn't mean that I'm right. That's just what I believe.
I would ask to call on Mark's experience and history here. I mean, you've probably seen quite a bit. I don't think it's inappropriate for you to offer an opinion or a thought.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to do is get genuine input from, especially, the list that I see here is really good. I mean, I know most of them, but, the concept of having cross-representation geographically by industry, when we had a project that was looking at needing the ACL decel lane, David Williams would do that, or not, Eddie Williams, I'm sorry, was on the board for a while. Eddie Williams would do that free for me. When I had a legal issue, I asked Bayless or the gentleman from York, I forgot his name now, who was Jeff.
Jim Bradford?
Jim Bradford, sorry, thanks, Teresa. But it was awfully nice to have that kind of cross-representation and industry expertise. Now, in terms of greater involvement, every year when I got to Greenville, we would have annual lunches with all the city managers and mayors. We would have annual lunches with all the utility folks, all the utility providers. We would have annual events for different subsectors where we were trying to get their input. We would have programs for that. So there's ways of getting, I think, that genuine kind of feedback that you want without having too big a board, or without, limiting it to a district representation kind of thing. I'm not suggesting that's a bad idea. I think I think the group that you have here is really good, and if you could get maybe a few less, I think that's 18 is a little unwieldy. But
a lot of these didn't show up.
Really? Well, then you kick them off. You have attendance guidelines. We did that.
Yeah. I think you missed 3 meetings in a row.
Yeah. I mean, but you got to get people who genuinely are interested. But if they are engaged, and that's something that you have to work to do. If they're engaged, then like you say, Watts, that feedback that you get is very beneficial in almost every facet of the program.
And one thing we haven't brought up is the fact that Growth Partners is in existence already, right? And Growth Partners has a lot of these folks on it right now, right? So that's the dynamic, and maybe that's what we talk about next meeting. I think Mitch, I would want Mitch to share a little bit about what Growth Partners have shared with him about forming this board, because I know they were excited about it, but anything you want to add related to what, because if we got Growth Partners, those folks are on Growth Partners, so,
Yeah, the only thing I can mention really about Growth Partners is, and I've heard it from multiple members, Watts, I believe you were in maybe at one of those meetings.
I used to attend.
There is a keen interest from them to have this community board, and they see value in it. So I don't know the history behind it, but I like the idea and the level of accountability and community engagement is something that's needed.
What would you like to see on the board, Mitch?
I don't know if I'm prepared to even say that right now, other than individuals that obviously care about this community that are going to advance the mission of economic development.
So do you want district representation and strategic partners, or just district representation?
I think, I don't know if that's a fair question, just as a manager, I want to kind of get between that, because you're putting Mitch kind of in a rock and hard place there. I think what we want is for y'all to deliberate and think through this, and we're here to give you feedback and advice. I think it's, my take is always, a mix is a good thing, right? And so I think we want a mix of a little bit of everything to make sure the community is represented on this board, and Mitch is getting the feedback and the support and experience that he needs. But I think there's some opportunity for y'all to work through where you're at.
Can
And
you
I don't
agree
know
with
if
Mitch?
Mitch giving you the
Can
answer
you
is
agree to a mix?
best for Mitch.
I make a motion.
Can you agree to a mix?
I want us to move forward with a recommendation. I think this is probably something that the full council probably needs to be involved in having a discussion about how this board is going to set up. I'm very sensitive to making sure that there's buy-in, and I'm not opposed to anyone on that list. I know a lot of them, they're great folks. But there's a reason why the board dissolved, it wasn't working, and I would say that I think that we're, you know, I think that we should come out of this with something and move forward with the
Restate your motion, if you don't mind.
that we make a recommendation to council that we reconstitute the board, and that the appointees to the board are one member from each council member. Each council member has representation on the board. We want to revisit that later, but I also said that we needed to also revisit this discussion and talk through what the mission of the board is going to be. What's their job? What's their role?
So,
The second, or no?
yeah, I would second. I mean, I think that,
Discussion?
no, I would say that with discussion, I would say that I'm not, again, I think having the ability to do subcommittees with them, that you're able to bring in other people, but they can be the direct conduit with that group, I think it makes a lot of sense, because you've got a lot of other committees, boards out there, Fort Mill, TK, this other one, that they can use as part of their subcommittees to go to and have discussions with. I think that, to me, I think there's an opportunity there. So I do second the motion. I think there's more opportunity once we get this structured. If we need to restructure, we can restructure even more down the road. So I do second the motion.
I can support the 7 members, but I think it's in our best interest to have a board that's represented by strategic partners here in the county. So we'll call for a vote then. All in favor? Opposed? Opposed. Okay, so we'll bring this before council.
Just as a question, I mean, you talk about revisiting the mission. Is that the next meeting of the board, or, I mean, because I'm trying to think about from staff, like what's our go-do?
The motion was to make a recommendation to council, because council's the one that's got to have some input. I mean, at least this gets this to council to say, hey, we're looking at a board. This is the first iteration of the board. Are you good with that? And then we need to ask council, do they want us to take the lead in coming up with a mission for the board?
So we'll do this at a workshop?
Okay,
or at the county
I
council?
just want to make sure we understand what
I'm
we're
glad you're
supposed to do
making sure,
next.
because I want to make sure when we get to the next meeting that we're asking council. And then I think it would be appropriate at that time to have a full discussion on.
So we're gonna do this at the workshop next week, or we do it at the council meeting?
We don't have time next week in the workshop,
Okay.
unless we
Well, I won't be at
want to
council
extend the
meeting
workshop.
17th.
I think what we're lining up with the committee process is that there will be a staff report if there's a recommendation that comes out of the committee. I don't know if Mitch is going to have time in time for the next council meeting, because the agenda items are already due, right, Karen?
Okay.
So as soon as staff can get on the next cycle, they'll develop an agenda item for the chair of the committee that goes with your report out. So you could refer to that in your report out at the next meeting. But then it will be, in theory, before council to have this discussion. That's what
So this will be in April. We'll discuss this at our full council meeting in April. First meeting in April.
Unless you want us to,
Well, because you won't be there.
when are you back?
First meeting in April.
Yeah.
I'm gone.
Yeah, you'd be back then, so that makes
That's when
sense.
the staff report will be ready for the cycle, and
Right.
then y'all could have a discussion
Yeah.
then.
Right, you've got, you need to be there.
So the first meeting in April.
First
will be
meeting in
when-
April,
when I'll
yeah.
report it out, unless I have somebody report it for me on the 17th. So we can discuss it at the next meeting.
So Mitch will draft kind of what y'all recommended and kind of
Yeah,
I
we
think
can,
this will get us started,
yeah,
and the council, and then the council can say, hey, you know, I do think that we should add this, because part of the discussion will be, there was a recommendation that it could be something.
yeah, we can,
Broad.
we'll just report, I can report it on whatever in that meeting on Monday, when you're gone, and then we'll get it on the agenda when you're back.
Okay, all right, I'll get you my thoughts on that.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so one other thing before we go into executive session, Mitch, you mentioned this, Mitch is actually going around meeting with the economic development departments, and he is open to anyone attending those meetings if you'd like to attend meetings with him. So just reach out to Mitch and let him know,
Yeah.
find out when he's going to his next meeting.
Let me know.
And we can do that. All right, so we need to go into executive session to discuss economic matters,
Yeah.
Project
Can you
United.
approve the minutes
example.
first?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes
Yeah,
from our last meeting on February the 6th?
yeah, motion to approve.
Second.
All right, all in favor, please say
Aye.
aye. Aye, no opposed, motion passes. All right, so now we're gonna move into executive session, to talk about economic development matters, Project Unagi, Project Sample, and Project Cobra. Is there
Yeah.
a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion,
Motion.
second?
Yep.
Second. All right, we'll move into executive session.
All right.
Can you close the door?
over 5 years. 82,000.
All right, we are out of executive session, and any actions?
Yeah, we do have one action recommendation to make a referral to the full council on a discussion from within executive session.
All right, second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
We are adjourned.